Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that honestly feels like it was ripped straight out of a Cold War spy novel, but I promise you, it's entirely real. We're going to unravel the mystery of a forgotten 1966 plane crash that didn't just claim lives, it fundamentally altered modern geopolitics and completely reshaped a nation's destiny. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this, a freezing morning in 1966. A commercial airliner tragically slams into the side of Europe's highest mountain, ending the lives of 117 people in an instant. But hidden among the passengers on that flight was one man who had recently made a massive, shocking promise. He claimed he could build an atomic bomb for his country in just 18 months. When his plane went down, well, that timeline vanished right along with him. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with a fatal flight, move on to the architect of the atomic dream, explore the global nuclear chessboard, dig into Cold War conspiracies, look at the tragic reality, and finally wrap up with the strategic nuclear fallout. Let's start with part one, a fatal flight, specifically Air India 101. On January 24th, 1966, Air India Flight 101, a Boeing 707, was en route from Bombay to London. Now, in command was Captain J.T. D'Souza, who was actually one of Air India's most experienced pilots. They had just finished a stopover in Beirut and were approaching Geneva. The flight was cruising up at 19,000 feet, which is roughly 3,000 feet above the summit of Mont Blanc. Then, without any warning, no distress signal, nothing, the aircraft just vanished from radar. An Italian pilot flying nearby reported seeing a strange black cloud on the mountain. But it wasn't a cloud. The plane had impacted Mont Blanc, leaving a massive crater and scattering debris for kilometers. There were absolutely zero survivors. Now, obviously, every single life lost on that mountain was a profound tragedy. But there was one specific passenger whose death literally sent shockwaves through the highest levels of international governments. That passenger was Homi Jahangir Baba, widely recognized as the visionary father of India's nuclear program. He was actually on his way to Vienna for a crucial meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency. His sudden death created an immediate massive vacuum in what was a deeply, deeply secretive national program. Which brings us to Section 2, Architect of the Atomic Dream, and how he built it all from scratch. You see, Baba wasn't just a brilliant scientist. He was a master strategic architect. Back in the 1930s, he earned his PhD at Cambridge's legendary Cavendish Lab, literally rubbing shoulders with giants like Niels Bohr. But when he returned to India, he didn't just use existing technology. He built the nation's entire scientific infrastructure from absolute scratch. He founded the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in 1945, became the very first chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission in 1948, and by 1960, he launched the Cyrus reactor with Canadian help. And that reactor produced plutonium, which is the exact material you need to make nuclear bombs. Baba fundamentally believed that for India to be a great power, to truly protect itself and maintain its self-respect, it absolutely needed a nuclear arsenal, and he was incredibly confident about pulling it off. Right after China's successful nuclear test in 1964, Baba went on All India Radio and made this totally astonishing claim. He boldly stated that if the government gave him the green light, he could build a nuclear bomb in just 18 months for the incredibly cheap cost of just 100 to 150 million rupees. Think about that. To put that into perspective, he was promising to build a functional nuclear weapon for less money than it costs to produce a modern Hollywood superhero movie today. Just wild. Let's move to Section 3, the global nuclear chessboard, and the insanely high stakes of the 1960s. So if we zoom out to 1965, the global nuclear club was incredibly exclusive. You had the US, the Soviet Union, and now China with the bomb. And these superpowers were completely desperate to maintain their monopoly. And this brilliantly illustrates how India, led by Baba's rapid advancements, was suddenly positioned as this immediate disruptor. He was threatening to completely crash this incredibly tense global superpower club. And the pressure was mounting at breakneck speed. After the 1962 India-China War and China's 64 nuclear test, India felt profoundly vulnerable. Finally, in December 1965, Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri secretly gave Baba the green light to hasten preparations for a nuclear test. But then, tragedy strikes, twice. On January 11, 1966, Prime Minister Shastri suddenly dies of a reported heart attack. Just 13 days later, Baba dies on Mont Blanc. Within 2 weeks, the two key architects who held the highly secretive details of India's nuclear future were just gone. Section 4, Cold War Conspiracies. Because with stakes this high, paranoia is practically guaranteed. To understand why conspiracies exploded around this, we have to look at the motive. Right at this exact time, between 1965 and 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, was being heavily negotiated in Geneva. The entire point of the NPT was to stop new countries from getting the bomb. The major fear was that if India built one, then maybe Pakistan follows, then the Middle East, destroying this whole non-proliferation framework. So this created a massive, documented global motive to stop India's progress in its tracks. And that intense motive fueled two wildly popular theories. The first was a CIA assassination via a bomb in the cargo hold. This was promoted years later by a journalist named Gregory Douglas, who quoted a purported CIA officer. The second theory claimed Flight 101 actually had a mid-air collision with a secret Italian F-104G fighter jet. That one was supported by a wreckage collector named Daniel Roche, who felt French authorities acted super suspiciously during the cleanup. Now, we are absolutely not taking sides here, but just looking at this neutrally, both theories point to the exact same underlying belief. The world saw Baba as way too dangerous a disruptor to ever be allowed to reach Vienna. However, as the historical sources remind us, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. So let's impartially look at the evidence here. Gregory Douglas was actually a pseudonym for a guy named Peter Stahl, who was a far-right conspiracy theorist known for peddling fake Nazi memorabilia and fabricating documents. He even had a previous hoax about the JFK assassination. His CIA confession story perfectly matched his long history of frauds. And as for the Italian jet collision, later investigations by a former Italian Air Force officer found absolutely zero Italian military records of an F-104G crashing anywhere near Mont Blanc that day. So without concrete evidence, these remain captivating but totally unsubstantiated spy stories. So what actually happened? Section 5, the tragic reality and the official findings. In March 1967, the French Inquiry Commission released its official findings, which the Indian government also accepted. And honestly, it was a cascade of minor, tragic mistakes. First, the plane's VOR system, a really crucial radio navigation tool, failed. Second, the pilot told Geneva Air Traffic Control that they had already passed Mont Blanc. Geneva corrected him, saying, "No, you still have 5 miles left." The pilot replied with a simple, "Roger." So the crucial point here is, the pilot totally misunderstood the correction. Thinking he was clear of the peak, he began a premature descent. Combine that with total whiteout weather conditions hiding the mountain in the clouds, and the plane slammed straight into the rock. And finally, Section 6, the strategic nuclear fallout and the decades of delay that followed. The contrast here is just stark, and the geopolitical setback for India was immense. Remember, Baba had boldly promised a nuclear bomb in 18 months. The historical reality? It took an agonizing 32 years for India to fully weaponize its nuclear capabilities, finally achieving it in 1998. The strategic impact of his sudden absence simply cannot be overstated. Baba's death created an immediate, massive policy vacuum. He essentially took the secret blueprints of Shastri's green light to the grave with him. Now, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi did eventually pick up the pieces. She led the country to its first successful test, Operation Smiling Buddha, in 1974. But the momentum was irreversibly damaged. The ambition survived, for sure. You can see that when they renamed his facility the Baba Atomic Research Center in 1967. But the actual execution was delayed for an entire generation. Bringing the story into the present day, we can clearly see the enduring legacy of that scientific infrastructure Baba built from scratch. Today, despite those decades of delay, India sits firmly in the exclusive 9-country nuclear club. They currently operate 25 nuclear reactors, which provide roughly 3% of the country's entire electricity grid. And those ambitions are scaling up massively right now. By the year 2047, India aims to generate a staggering 100 gigawatts of electricity from nuclear power. The foundation that Baba laid down before his untimely death is still, quite literally, powering the nation's future today. It's really incredible to think about the terrifying fragility of geopolitical history. You have a brilliant mind, a top-secret government green light, and a nation sitting right on the brink of superpower status. And it was all derailed by a faulty navigation system, a whiteout blizzard, and a single misunderstood Roger over the radio. So I'll leave you to ponder this. How drastically did that one misunderstood radio call alter the entire balance of global power for decades? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shaped our world.